Hello everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm now filming from my different location now. I've now moved to New York. I'm in my penthouse suite. Just come off a video call with Elon Musk and several other fellow billionaires. But anyway, I now want to talk about my round one whole game. And yes, your video is not broken. I drew with an 1829, which is over a 600 points rating difference. However, I should state that this is a typical pairing these days, and a typical result, in fact. It's why many people feel that the rating system is broken. We're in a situation now where we have a lot of deflation in the system. FIDE have now tried to change this, and they are effectively adding people. They're gonna beef up people at the end of the year. So, for example, someone like my opponent in this game is a 14-year-old Ukrainian refugee. Could pop up to something like he could be given an extra few points. Some people with an even lower rating may be given even more points. And the idea of that is to kind of reverse some of the deflation that we've seen in the rating system. Because I feel like I'm probably playing as well now as I've ever played, but my rating is going down. It's steadily going down. I managed to reverse that over the last few months, but because of playing so many underrated players, underrated juniors, where the rating doesn't reflect how strong they are, either because they don't play enough or they're improving so quickly the rating is not taking that into account. It's become increasingly difficult to compete and not lose rating points. If you do, the best way to not lose rating points is effectively to not play. Anyway, so I was playing this game. And it was a really bad game from my point of view. And actually, we're going to play over it with the point of the engine. I think I made several mistakes in this game, which enabled, which led to me playing quite badly. I think one of them was I probably played maybe a slightly too passive opening choice, or I didn't understand the opening very well. I didn't really have much experience with this particular opening choice. Secondly, I started playing a little bit too superficially at certain points. But I think the major reason why I played badly in this game was basically due to the good play of my opponent, who played a very good game actually, and possibly should have won towards the end of the game. That's effectively the number one reason why you may play badly, is because you're put under pressure by your opponent, and he did a good job of that actually, as we'll see in the game. But I'm actually going to put the engine on for this particular game, just to show you some of the mistakes I made. So I haven't really analysed this myself with the engine. Can we turn off maybe the arrows, because I find that a little bit annoying. But we're going to keep the engine on for this particular game. And yeah, so I played this move A5, which is an interesting move. And I think it's quite a decent move. And if they you take back the pawn and you get a lot of pressure down this A file. But I've not really had any experience with this line. I've rarely played a Bogo Indian. Part of the reason I decided to have a look at this line was I remember looking through some of my old games recently. One of the games where I played well was a game against Matthew Turner in the Bogo. And I thought, maybe I should have given this a try more often. I didn't really give the Bogo enough respect. I mean, I'm not sure it's really, I feel like I'm an attacking player more than I'm a strategic player. So I probably should have, maybe gone for something sharper like the Grunfeld or the King's Indian. But it is what it is. As Nakamura would say, I played A5. My opponent played E3, which is quite a solid move. And yeah, so I went D6, which seems to be reasonable. I did wonder about going d5, but the reason I didn't was because I was slightly concerned. Yeah, that was my original intention. I probably should have done that. I think that was another thing I was doing badly in this game, was that I was playing to, you know, maybe I would say superficially, but I was, you know, I wasn't playing at the right rhythm. I was either playing too superficially, or I was spending too long. You know, it's fine to spend long, but if you're thinking about the right things. You know, if you're just sitting there and you're just not really thinking about anything, you're not calculating variations, which is effectively what I was doing in this game, just worrying about stuff, then that's not very good. Now, the reason I didn't do that was because I was slightly afraid he might put the knight in here. Actually, can he take first? Let's say he takes. And then puts the knight in. How good is this? Let's look at this line, like f4. What is the engine coming up with as a antidote to this? Because I was slightly afraid of this in the game, and I thought if he sticks the knight on e5, has he not got potential kingside attack? Maybe the rook will come to f3. Maybe I'd get too afraid of stuff like this. The computer's saying that you can take, and then, for example, yeah, it's kind of an awkward move to play, but it takes the sting out of white's initiative. So the idea is you're going to trade, you're going to stick the knight on e4, and then you're going to go f6 and kick that knight. It's quite important to kick that knight away, I think, in the long term. And that would have led to some kind of slight strategic victory for black. So again, I think a lot of it is about extending, should I say, the extent of your, extending the extent, if that makes any sense. It probably doesn't grammatically. But extending, you know, how much you analyse, how much you calculate. So rather than cutting lines off early, I think when you're in really good form, you kind of keep looking that a little bit deeper, and you're willing to use the time. You're not worried about getting into time trouble. Obviously, there needs to be a kind of an element where you're keeping control. You're not using too much time, but yeah, I think it's very important not to think superficially. So I went d6, which was not a terrible move anyway. Yeah, and this is where probably found the wrong plan, and I went c5. And the problem with c5 in this position is it creates this long-term weakness on b6, which isn't a tragedy for black, but yeah, it is some kind of hindrance, as we'll see later in the game. I did consider stuff like this and plonking a knight on e4. Also consider bishop e4 as well, which looks a bit weird, but probably knight e4 looks more natural, right? You're kind of making use of that bishop on b7 rather than exchanging it off. Well, there is some argument for bishop e4 simply because what are white's main advantages in these kind of positions? And that's why it's recommended bishop e1 here, is that white has the two bishops, which in the long term is a major strategic advantage. And unlike in the Nimzo Indian, where you manage to exchange off, where you give white the bishop pair, but they have the fractured pawn structure, in this position, black has no strategic compensation for white's strategic advantage of the two bishops, if that makes any sense. So bishop e1 was an interesting move by white, which is recommended by the computer. But yeah, going back to this position, I played the move c5. And yeah, it starts recommending e4 in all these kind of situations now, which I kind of did expect actually. Or, you know, at some point I expected him to play e4, sorry. And yeah, I did. I mean, I don't even analyse lines on IBD7, but it's true that white has a space edge here. He's got the Marcosi bind. It's going to be difficult to get in d5 effectively. White should be better, but knight c6, which is recommended, is probably a better move, hitting the knight. Black is worse here. It's true, you know, this is a long-term weakness. White has b5 square. White should be better. So I think that was definitely possible. But he went rook d1. And again, e4 was recommended. And yeah, I did consider very strongly playing bishop e4 here. The reason I didn't was because I just felt like the exchange is getting closer to a draw. I wanted to keep the position complex. I think you can change your style. Maybe this is a weakness in my style. People who are more keen to go into the endgame wouldn't have had any problems playing the move bishop e4. Players who are more reliant on their endgame ability to win games. I mean, my endgames are pretty good. But I just feel like I prefer keeping the position complex. I mean, another move was knight e4 as well, but I think that, yeah, that does lead to problems down the d file. Because he takes in c5 and the rook starts to become very active. So bishop e4 made a lot of sense, but I went queen e7, which actually computer has. So again, that's another mistake. It's another bad move. We see already it's quite a poor game by black. Yeah, something like this would have just led to a big advantage for white. So I'm already playing slightly superficially. I probably should have, you know, I'm thinking already about the opponent too much. I should have been thinking about playing the best moves. Against, if I was black against Michael Adams here, I probably would have gone bishop e4 to try and neutralise his advantage. And happy to make a draw. But because I'm playing a lower rated player, I'm not trying to make the best moves. I'm just trying to keep the game interesting. Yeah, this is an important moment. I feel like that move betrays a lack of understanding. Because you're kind of killing your own play. You're giving black the b4 square on a plate. I just felt like that was a weak move. You know, the reason he played it is he's afraid of me playing a4 and clamping down on b3. But if you're going to be afraid of that, why not just go b3? I mean, that makes more sense. Because then after a4, you can simply go b4. Or simply going b4 was another possibility for white, which actually that was a move I expected. Of course, the computer wants to just get on with it and just go e4 and just break open the position, which makes a lot of sense. You know, let's use those bishops, create a bit of space. Bishops want to use that space advantage. So yeah, so he went a4, which is a very surprising move for me, and then I felt like I was going to win the game, but I went rook c8 again, a weak move. Why not go knight e4? Yeah, I didn't really like variations like this, I must admit. I thought that this was kind of a bit boring. But maybe I can outplay him here. I could take and go knight c5. So I went here, and now, yeah, maybe a move like e5 was also, again, played weakly around about here. Knight e4 was possible. I went rook fd8. Another bad move, he should play e4. So it's maybe just a lack of understanding here by me. And to a certain extent my opponent as well, because he refuses to play this move e4, which the computer loves. So he went rook c1. And again, I've got this chance to go e5, lock it up a little bit. Didn't really consider e5. I only really considered this idea of going d5. I probably, if I had this position again, I would have gone bishop e4 and just make some kind of strategic exchange. But I went d5, which now he came up with knight e5, which I thought was an excellent move actually. And I still feel that, but I feel like I reacted badly to knight e5 as well. So yeah, it was already kind of an ego battle. People started drifting around about the board at this point, and they were watching the game, and I started becoming annoyed by people watching the game because I could tell that this game was proving to be harder than what I expected it to be. I thought I'd win easily. Obviously, I'm playing against someone 600 points lower rated than me. I thought I would be like starting to press at this point, but I realised I'm worse, you know, and I felt uncomfortable. And there's people like there's one guy who just stood there for like 5 minutes. Eventually I said, could you move? You know, because it's kind of, I don't know, you feel that kind of psychological pressure when somebody is right by you and they're directly watching the game. And some people feel that you don't notice that. I always notice when people are watching the game. but obviously I shouldn't react. You know, they were completely within their rights to watch the game. But I felt uncomfortable with people watching the game at this point. So yeah, it was kind of betrayed my annoyance. I don't want to get a reputation someone's a bit of an arse. You know, you could end up in one of these. I remember there was a famous thread on digital spy forums about famous people you've met who were nice and famous people you met who were nasty or something like that. And they were talking about how some famous people are lovely and they'll stop for autographs and everything, and they'll, you know, I mean, I'm not a famous person, but I mean, you know, as a chess player, relatively well known in the UK, obviously within the chess community, but I'm obviously not even remotely famous in the wider world. But yeah, like celebrities that you may have met. And one person who came up as being a kind of an unpleasant person to meet was Cilla Black. Funnily enough, she was like, you know, famous in the airline industry for like, she's dead now. But yeah, Cilla Black's famous TV presenter, famous for Blind Date, also a singer. She was originally called Cilla White, chose her name to Cilla Black. And I think she was friends with the Beatles as well. But she had a reputation for not being very pleasant towards airline staff and stuff like that. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent, as I always do. 95, yeah. So it's hard to actually... Yeah, I mean, if you do something like this, then it's kind of drawish, right? You could even take, and it starts to become very drawish. Could even trade and go rook d1. You know, how are you going to win that position? So these are the kind of things you think about when you're playing against lower-rated players. But I think what I did now was quite bad, because which is probably not too bad, but now I should, yeah, I saw this variation. And I thought, yeah, I didn't like this, and I thought something like this, it just ends up being very drawish, you know, because you're starting to exchange pieces. I think that's the problem, yeah, when you're trying to beat lower rated players, you can put yourself under too much pressure. And I think that's the mistake I made in this game. So I took. Now I played a very bad move, because I started to realise, you know, if I start going after his pawn, well, I didn't see this move, queen b5, but I thought he might go queen g3, and if I take, he starts going d5, and I saw variations like this, and the computer confirms it's bad for black. Unsurprisingly, the bishop is coming to life. You go and grab an irrelevant pawn. I mean, how many moves is it going to take you to get that pawn down to queen? Well, even if it gets to a2, it's not going anywhere anyway, because white is controlling that square on a1. So it's kind of an irrelevant pawn, really. The only relevance it might have is, with a queen on a4, you might be able to get pressure on c4. But if he's going to make me in the meantime, it's kind of irrelevant. So I saw variations like that. I started to become a little bit concerned. So I went queen d6. I think I was playing a little bit on ego as well here. I was, rather than spending quite a lot of time and realising this is a very important moment, I didn't even consider actually the move bishop a6, which looking at it now looks very, very obvious. I don't know why I didn't consider that move. Maybe I was afraid of d5 again. Yeah, which I think maybe actually I did vaguely consider that. That I just felt like, yeah, I was a little bit afraid of these exchanges, and maybe you can even take, and then can he do this, or is this ridiculous? It doesn't seem that. I mean, rook dc8 is tough to see, because if you trade and take, yeah, you're not better because he's very active. Yeah, so I played a real blooper. I went queen d6, which is a shocker. And as soon as I played it, so I started thinking, oh my god, you know, what happens if he just takes and goes c5? That's what I mean about playing with ego. If I'd spent a bit longer there and just accepted, actually, you know, you're in a battle here, don't play with ego, don't try and pretend that you're not in a battle, don't get delusional, you know, accept that, you know, this is a proper game now. I might have spent a bit of time before queen d6. But after the move c5, yeah, I've started to realise I was worse, because, for example, if I play a move like here, with the idea if he takes, you're going to be hitting c3, you can just do something like this. Actually, the computer was saying bishop d2 immediately. And I thought, well, he's going to take on b6 and a5's weak. You know, and if I trade, he's going to take on a5, and then I'm in big trouble. So I'm just lost. It's worse than big trouble. I'm just lost. And the computer actually says, yeah, I mean, like rook b1 is even stronger. Take. Well, you can't take, actually, sorry. Yeah, so something, I was surprised he didn't go for this direct queen d6, c5. But I think maybe he either missed c5 or he underestimated how strong it was. Or again, you know, he could have maybe fallen into a trap here, thinking it's a GM, he's not going to make a mistake. He went queen e2, which is maybe one of his few mistakes of the game. Actually, overall, I think he outplayed me. He played a very good game. And I was kind of aware, actually, at the board that it was going to be a tough game, because I recognised him from a tournament we played in Newcastle. It was a Blitz tournament about a year ago. It was a qualifier for the British Blitz Championships. And I remember I played him in that. I did beat him in that, but I remember he beat quite a few good players. He beat Max Turner, who tied for first in the whole Weekend Congress this same tournament. He might have either beat maybe Story or Tim Wall or something like that. So he beat some good players. I knew he was dangerous. I knew he was much better than his rating. Queen e2 was not a terrible move. But yeah, again, why not go queen c6 here? I was a little bit afraid of d5 actually. But again, it's poor calculation. I should at least calculate what happens if you just take. You know, probably I just was too lazy to calculate it. And thinking, well, if I take with a queen, he's going to take here. But in fact, you can just take with a rook. And he doesn't have any clever tricks. So you should be calculating his variations. So what happens if he goes f3? Well, bishop h6. I'm still not totally impressed by Black's position, but apparently that was better. I went queen f4. Again, another bad move. See what I mean about being a bad game? We went f3. I was just thinking too superficially in the entire game. So I went queen g5. Again, probably a bad move. I should... Yeah, I didn't really see this idea of bishop a6 until later. Queen g5, another, yeah, bishop d2, an excellent move. He went bishop e1, another very good move. As I started to realise once the queen, well, I thought his idea is if I go queen g5, he's just going to repeat, right? And make a draw. Because obviously, given the rating differential, that would make a lot of sense. At some point, he did offer a draw later on, but I declined. But then I decided to repeat. Yeah, I could take on d4, but then he goes bishop f2, he hits b6. So clever idea of just giving up this pawn. I went here. Yeah, bishop f2. Actually, rook b1 was even stronger. Yeah, and I was concerned about that because I'd missed this earlier, that when the queen's on h5, that he's threatening rook b5. I'd actually seen this by this point. That he's threatening rook b5. And the queen is going to get hit, which is bad news for black. Now, yeah, if you do move like this, actually c5 is saying probably rook b5 is also better for white. But no, then you can go e5, but c5 is saying it's crushing, yeah. Horrible position for black. Really not what you want at all. Bishop d5 is saying, well, he could even just take on b6. Yeah, it's quite good. You know, why not take the pawn? I mean, you know, computer always comes up with moves kind of unnecessary always. You know, I know it's suggesting bishop a6 at some point. But, you know, for human players, it's more logical just to take the pawn. So it went bishop f2, which wasn't the best. And white's still better because of the two bishops. Weak pawn on b6. White's quite an open position. The bishop's actually relocated. Quite good to understand my opponent. Actually, I think the bishop is actually better here. I thought it was a mistake to relocate the bishop. Because I thought on bishop c3 it could aim down at the black king, which has some point to it as well, but I think it's probably even better on f2. So, you know, it's one of the advantages having two bishops. They can switch across the board very quickly. So in this position, my opponent played bishop c2, another good move, and I went rook e8. Yeah, we kind of faffed around for a bit. I I kind of got the sense he wasn't really doing much here, and he probably was hoping that I would kind of make a repetition here and we'd just repeat, which again is understandable, given, you know, it's a huge rating differential, so it's kind of like a must-win game for me. But at the end, I kind of lost my nerve at the end of the game. So actually, maybe this point in the game wasn't so bad from me. He doesn't hate my moves so much. Maybe I've reached a point where I've made so many mistakes this game. Actually, yeah, that was a funny moment as well, because when he went Queen E1, I reached out towards my Rook on E8, and I didn't quite touch it. I very nearly touched my Rook on E8. My idea was to go Rook D8, and then at the last second, I suddenly realised he's got Bishop H4. If I go Rook D8, he's got Bishop H4, and the game is over. He's going to win the exchange for nothing. So I was like, oh my god, you know. I mean, I would have noticed it. I can go Rook F8, but it's obviously not a very good move, right? But it still keeps you in the game. I played Queen F4. And he went Queen E4. I took. Yeah, so my idea was, in some situations, I might go E5. And maybe that was actually a good idea here. And just put the Rook on B8. Although White's still better. You know, it's not White, it's not Black that's trying to win this game, it's really White, because the pawn on B6 is weak. If I could get Rook C8 in, have the knight on C5. I mean, can I do that actually? Can I do this? It's saying here and then just put the knight on C5 anyway. It feels a bit ropey though. It feels this whole construction. If he takes on C5, I should be happy. You know, that would be a concession. It'd be very easy to kind of panic here. You're seeing that A4 and E4 are being hit. But you also have to bear in mind that if Black ever takes on E4, then B6 will drop. Bishop G4 is a clever move. It's kind of similar to what happened in the game. The idea is if you go here now, D6, and suddenly Black ends up in big trouble. Because pawn reaches D7, not good news, right? So then I'm going to lose that control over C5, which I think is quite... I mean, after a move like this, I'm even wondering if he could even take. Yeah, I mean, this looks incredibly dangerous for Black. With those two connectors, I mean, a sort of thing that I think like a strong GM, like a Kramnik, would just do automatically, would be to take on B6. I think the exchange sack is pretty good here. Yeah, the computer evaluation is creeping up. This kind of actually reminds me of a game between Anand and Kasparov. And it was the first decisive game in the 1995 World Championship match, which took place at the World Trade Center in New York. Before it obviously collapsed in 2001. There was a World Chess Championship match there. I believe it took place, from historical memory, it took place near the restaurant, the windows on the World or something like that, on one of the higher floors. And Kasparov ended up winning the match, something like 5-2. Or maybe actually 5-1. Maybe this is Anand's only win, but I remember Anand won in the Scheveningen fairly early on in the match. No, sorry, not early on, but it was about round 10. So loads of draws, and then about round 10, round game 10 or something like that, or game 11, can't remember. Anand won, and then Kasparov came back with this amazing preparation in the next game. But I remember that game that Anand won, he sacrificed exchange. Worth looking up that game actually, because it kind of vaguely reminds me of this position. Anyway, in the game, I'll just show you how the game finished. Yeah, looking very shaky here. And yeah, I played a ridiculous move here. Again, it was ego. I mean, I had 5 minutes left. I had enough time, maybe even more than 5 minutes. We had around about 6 or so. I was slightly ahead of. I remember being slightly ahead of my opponent on the clock. And if B6 was defended, you would even consider rook e6 and knight c5. If the rook was on b8, you would probably consider that, and then you'd have very good comp because all the pawns would be weak to knight. You know, or say if the pawn was on c7, let's say white had a pawn on a3 or something, you probably do that automatically. You take and go knight c5, almost. But here it just will just drop b6 and lose the game. So you can't do this. But I should have considered more king f8. I kind of like panicked because I saw these variations where he's going bishop f2, and I just felt like with the bishop, you know, whenever the situation comes to c5, I know that it's where it's defended. Again, you've got to calculate these variations. You start playing with ego, you stop calculating, you start playing too much on intuition and gut instinct. And you stop calculating concrete variations. I'm not entirely sure why that happens, but it obviously happened to me in this game. But instead I played his king h7. I think I kind of, yeah, and yeah, I was aware that bishop f2 he could have played. I mean, he could also consider taking here and taking here, but I think this is the kind of thing I was angling for. Admittedly, white is not really in any danger after a move like king f2. But, you know, you have to find king f2. It's not guaranteed you're going to find that move. If king gets to e3, it's going to be a draw. So I think I should have gone king f8. It'd been interesting to see what happened. I mean, you know, I've got to gamble, really. I mean, it's stupid to take a draw. I've got to gamble. I'm playing against them, you know, somebody's 1800. And that ultimately cost me in the tournament, really, because I was always playing catch-up after that. And in the last round, because the tournament was abbreviated, I'm just going to demonstrate why the tournament was abbreviated. Because this is a game that I played in round 2. Which actually ended up being annulled. And this is a guy called Phillips, and I was white. I'm going to flip the board. So I was white in this game. So, if anyone remembers, there was it's coming out of the thing now. If you lean back, it sort of like loses the. You end up merging into the background. So I'll come forward a little bit. And I get a kind of, you know, floating head thing. But yeah, I've always had a long-term interest in horse racing, right? And this dates back for something like the sort of like late 80s, early 1990s. The worst thing about, like, any gambler will tell you, the worst thing you can do is win your first bet, because that's often how gamblers start. They win the first bet they ever placed. And sure enough, I won the first horse racing bet I ever placed. I remember placing it. My dad placed it for me or something. It was in a betting shop near Catford in southeast London. And I just had a gut feeling about the horse, and it was like, I don't know, it was like 10-1 or something in the tissue. John McCreary was on Channel 4 Racing at the time. And I remember mentioning the horse, actually. But I came back, and so I backed it. What was that? I put like 5 on it, I can't even remember. It was like, what, £2 or whatever, like tenner. Who knows? I backed it, and then I was really disappointed when I found out it won. It was only like 2-1, so it'd been backed in. I'd been backed in massively, but it won, of course. But yeah, I got massively into horse racing. Obviously, you follow the Grand National. Everybody, even people who don't necessarily follow horse racing all year round, they watched the Grand National at Aintree. And there was one year, 1993, where it was a big calamity. There was a starter called Keith Brown. And he was retiring. I think it was Major Keith Brown. And he was kind of like a bit like a slightly pompous, kind of upper class guy, right? That's the impression you got, you know, when you watch the starts of these races. You know, you kind of, jockeys, get behind the tape, jockeys, get back, jockeys. You know, like shout and scream at them. And there was a lot of, obviously, a lot of jostling. It wasn't his fault. There was a lot of jostling from the jockeys trying to get to the front of the tape. Because they want to get the best position. So that's often lead to full start. So that's what happened that year. There was a full start. They called it back. It was chaos. Right? But then there was another full start. But a lot of the jockeys, so more than half the field, didn't realise it was a full start. They carried on. And and 9 of the runners didn't you know, get into the race, which obviously would not be allowed by the starter. So the starter wanted to recall, but the horses carried on. This was 1993, and sadly, one of the horses at the end won. Escher Ness was ridden by John White, trained by Jenny Pittman. Won the race, 33-1. But it was a non-race, so you could tell, like, when he was coming through, you know, there was no cheers going up from the crowd, which you'd expect in a Grand National. When he was coming through at the end, you could tell that he kind of realised what had happened. The jockey had kind of realised what had happened. You could sense it. And I think this kind of, the reason I'm going this long convoluted story is this kind of what happened in round 2 of this whole weekend Congress. We were playing the rounds, and at some point the lights blew. So all the games had to get cancelled because the lighting was too bad. So they asked us to leave the room. Right, we're going to try and fix the lighting. We don't want to continue with the bad lighting. We could have continued, but it was quite dark. You know, it wasn't the same conditions as the start of the game. You're having to sort of like squint. You know, there's plenty of light coming in from outside, but what happens if it starts clouding over, or, you know, rainstorm? You're not going to be able to see anything almost. And then there's also the issue later on. So that's what happened. I'm just going to show you the game and get to that point later anyway. So in this game, I again played with too much ego. I was playing against another 1800 player, another underrated player, but older than the guy I played in round 1. You know, I was quite happy around about this point in the game. We got a kind of position very similar to a game Magnus Carlsen played against Lamy in Vacancy a few years ago. Magnus Carlsen did the typical grind. White's better here. I believe that Lamy played his queen to b6 and you got a queen exchange. White maybe took and went a4 at some point. But anyway, Carlsen ended up winning the game in typical brilliant fashion. Look that game up. It's a really good game. But he went queen e7. The drawback queen e7 now, it's now hard to develop that knight. Because if you now go to d7, you're just going to drop that pawn. That's probably why Lamy decided to go for the queen exchange. If you, knight a6 looks a bit awkward, because where are you going to go after knight a6? If you go back to c7, you're dropping b7 anyway. So I played bishop e2. Castled. I played c4. No, I didn't play c4 actually. Sorry, I castled. And he went knight d5. I dropped the bishop back to d2. He went a5. I played c4. He played a4. Queen went here. Knight went to b4. Yeah, and at this point I realised actually, you know, well, I didn't realise anything at this point, but I was just playing too quickly. And I was just blitzing my moves out, and I was sort of playing with ego. I think I was on tilt from the game before. I was just like, you know, I was desperate to try and win the game. I should have spent more time. I saw a good move, which was queen g4, which is a good move because it threatens bishop takes h6. You're not really worried about f5 because you can always put queen on f4. Suddenly this square is weak. e6 is a potential weakness, and black is blocking the bishop in. I should have spent some time here. This is a critical moment. The computer even says rook d1 because if you take on a2, he goes c5, blocking out the knight on here, and then the knight is suddenly trapped. Instead, I'd seen this variation earlier and thought, oh, queen c3. I blitzed it out, which is ridiculous. It's just playing with ego. And he came up with a very good response. He played c5. And then he went here. And now, at this point, the lights blew. So, yeah, that was really the critical moment of the whole thing. And, you know, actually, while I've been thinking for about 5 minutes on this position before the lights blew, and suddenly you heard this loud bang, and everyone was like, what the hell's that, you know? And then you realise the lights are blown. But I realised suddenly this position is very tricky. He's threatening knight c2, maybe coming into d4, rook can go to d8. This pawn is going to drop off queen c5. If I go bishop e3, you can play something like, maybe you can even consider a move like A3. Knight B4. I started seeing variations like this. I thought this is actually very tricky now. I could even lose the game, you know. And I was kind of relieved. So we went outside and we're like waiting around, and I'm chatting to people like Mark Hebden, Richard Britton for ages. And I'm like, you know, we need a decision from the organiser. I said, look, we need a decision one way or the other. I don't want to wait around for like 2-3 hours waiting for the issue to be fixed. Should we cancel the round? Or should we just, you know, it's unfortunate for people that are winning the game, but that's the way it is. So that's what happened in the end. We cancelled the round, and this game never continued. And it would have been fascinating to know what would have happened if we had continued. I think my opponent was a little bit peeved, to be honest, understandably, because he's got a good fighting position against the GM. He's got what he wanted, and he's got a chance to test himself against the GM. But he never got the chance to follow through on that. So I felt a little bit sorry for him. But unfortunately, that's life. So that was the round that never happened.